17.5%. That is a massive number. It's the guaranteed annual return that literally just triggered a multi-billion-dollar shakeup right at the exact intersection of Wall Street and Silicon Valley.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're decoding what is absolutely a tectonic shift in the business world. We're going to look at exactly how Silicon Valley server farms and massive Wall Street private equity capital are joining forces, and more importantly, how they are about to aggressively disrupt everyday workplaces.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the billion-dollar weekend, look at the great AI bottleneck, compare the OpenAI versus Anthropic deals, explore the threat to big consulting, and finally, break down what this actually means for you.
Let's start with part one, the billion-dollar AI weekend, where two massive, industry-altering deals dropped in a single afternoon.
The timeline of how this played out is pretty wild. On May 3rd, the Wall Street Journal teases a $1.5 billion joint venture involving Anthropic. Then, just hours later, early on May 4th, Bloomberg drops the massive news of a $10 billion OpenAI deal. That exact same afternoon, Blackstone officially confirms their Anthropic partnership. The timing here was absolutely no coincidence, and the sheer speed of this sequence is just staggering. This was a highly coordinated, high-stakes battle as the two biggest frontier AI labs went head-to-head to lock in enterprise dominance.
Which brings us to part two, the great AI bottleneck. Because all these billions are really trying to solve one specific problem. Why just handing out software logins isn't enough?
And this framework from the Boston Consulting Group brilliantly illustrates that bottleneck. AI integration really happens in three steps: deploy, reshape, and invent. Now, right now, most companies are totally stuck at step one. They hand out AI software licenses and just kind of cross their fingers for a magical surge in productivity. But to get real financial returns, they desperately need highly skilled embedded engineers to actively reshape their roles and workflows, ultimately moving towards inventing entirely new offerings.
So, how are the big players tackling this bottleneck? Let's move to part three, the OpenAI versus Anthropic deals, a real tale of the tape.
Now, what's really interesting about these two approaches is the stark contrast in strategies. You've got OpenAI setting up the deployment company with a massive $10 billion valuation anchored by private equity giants like TPG and Bain, and famously offering that 17.5% return floor we talked about. On the flip side, Anthropic's joint venture is a lot leaner at a $1.5 billion valuation, but it brings in a heavyweight Wall Street consortium including Blackstone and Goldman Sachs, with no guaranteed return floor disclosed.
Let's take a second to demystify that 17.5% OpenAI return floor because it's fascinating. Analysts call it a structurally subordinated piece of paper. What does that actually mean in plain English? Well, it's a highly creative financial setup. OpenAI is essentially converting its future growth potential into a tradable, fixed-yield instrument. This lets them tap into massive private equity balance sheets to fund their expansion without having to dilute their own company's equity any further. It honestly looks a lot more like a high-yield credit instrument than a standard venture deal.
Meanwhile, Anthropic is taking a very targeted approach. They're leveraging their investors' existing portfolios to drop their Claude AI directly into mid-sized enterprises across some very specific traditional industries. We're talking healthcare, manufacturing, financial services, retail, and even real estate. By partnering up with firms like Blackstone, Anthropic gets an instant, built-in pipeline of sophisticated corporate clients.
But if these AI labs are deploying their own engineers directly into companies, someone has to lose out, right? That brings us to part four. The threat to big consulting.
The traditional management consulting giants, your McKinseys, Bains, and BCGs, they are squarely in the crosshairs here. As Let's Data Science pointed out in their recent analysis, the model is conspicuously similar to Palantir's forward-deployed engineer playbook. This is a direct structural assault on the massive integration revenues that big consulting firms have relied on for the last 18 months. The AI labs are basically cutting out the middleman.
Let's see how this builds on that bottleneck we discussed earlier. The old way? You'd hire traditional consulting firms to map out an AI strategy over 9 long months. The new way is to embed lab engineers from OpenAI or Anthropic directly into your company for 3 quarters and have them actively ship working AI agents right into your production lines. It's a massive shift from endless strategizing to rapid, hands-on execution.
All right, so we've talked billions of dollars and Wall Street maneuvering. Let's bring this down to earth for part 5. What this means for you, the human impact. Look, the immediate fear anytime we talk about AI integration is job replacement. It's a totally natural anxiety to have. But based on the Boston Consulting Group's framework, particularly during that critical reshape phase we mentioned, AI is largely meant to be a force multiplier, not just a direct substitute. It's meant to automate the tedious tasks and generate insights so you can do your core job better and much faster.
So the crucial point is, what does this practically look like for your day-to-day? Well, if you work in a mid-sized office, you might literally have one of these embedded AI engineers sitting at the desk right next to yours pretty soon. Your daily routines are going to be actively redesigned, your software will likely be swapped out from the top down by private equity owners, and the skills you actually need to do your current job are going to shift dramatically.
And that brings up a really critical reality, which is impartially captured in this quote. The customer is rebuilding around a model it does not control, with engineers it did not hire, in service of a return floor it did not negotiate. Everyday workflows will now be permanently tied to proprietary AI models, and the pace and nature of that change will be heavily dictated by Wall Street owners who are desperately looking to hit those massive return targets.
We are absolutely witnessing a fundamental shift in how everyday work gets done. It's driven by billions of dollars in a sudden, intense urgency to turn AI potential into immediate corporate profit. The tools aren't just floating in the cloud anymore, the engineers are coming directly to the office. So the question I really want to leave you with is this. When an AI engineer arrives from one of these new deployment firms to actively redesign your job, will you be ready?